Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me so much pleasure to welcome all of you on behalf of India Habitat Center and Professor Benoy K Behl. Today's talk is the 41st in his monthly series, Glimpses of Culture. From 2001 till 2020, when the last Limca Book of Records was published, Professor Behl was each year given the record for being the most traveled photographer and art historian. For decades, he traveled to all corners of the country, often spending just one night at each location. Therefore, despite the vastness of the corpus of surviving Indian art, a journey through art history with him takes us to numerous places of significance, including those which are not well known to tourists. He is the person who, for the first time, photographed the ancient Buddhist paintings of Ajanta in their true colors and details. His book, The Ajanta Caves, has been in constant reprint for over 25 years and has established the art of Ajanta worldwide. His talk on the latest edition of this book received a resounding ovation at the Jaipur Literature Festival earlier this month. The art of the Nalanda University and the Buddhist sites of Odisha is known, but how many are aware of the contemporaneous Pilak Stupa in Tripura and of the continuity of art across Bihar, Odisha, Tripura, Paharpur in Bangladesh, and the Buddhist centers of Indonesia? Here is where the single-handed vast documentation of art by Professor Behl joins the dots and helps us see a fuller picture of the Indian artistic traditions. Today, he takes us to Eastern India, where a great chain of Buddhist monastic universities was created. Knowledge was sought with great intellectual vigor and was spread from here to the many countries of Asia. Professor Behl shares with us the new developments which took place in artistic traditions to convey the dynamic paths to enlightenment which were formulated in this period. Ladies and gentlemen, Benoy K Behl speaks to us today on the grace of Eastern India. Thank you for your attention, and over to Professor Behl now.
Thank you very much, Sujata Chatterji. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A great pleasure to be here again with all of you. My many thanks to India Habitat Center for this opportunity yet again to share some beautiful aspects of the culture and art of India with all of you. I also remain deeply grateful to Doordarshan for their great support and for having patronized the making of my so many films on these numerous subjects, which are serious subjects, research subjects, not at all like the sort of the majority of the broadcasting that takes place these days, which is so commercial. But in its spirit as a public broadcasting service, Doordarshan has been wonderful to over so many years to sponsor the making of my films on art history. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been seeing the development of the art of India. We began with the beginnings of the art at the Indus Valley civilization. From there, we moved on to seeing the fundamentals of Indian art, which were established forever by the time of the Shunga period, around the 2nd century BCE. And we saw the wonderful art which was created there. Subsequently, we saw the development of beautiful deities, exquisite deities in Indian art, whose purpose it was to awaken the grace within us. Looking upon them, we used to awaken the grace within us, to eventually awaken the grace so much that it would fill us completely, till we had in fact become the deity, till we had become the embodiment of the marvelous virtues which were presented in the deity. Now, in all this, the purpose of Indian art was to lift the veils of illusion, the Maya or Mithya of the material world, in order to show us the grace which underlies all that there is. And the art of India was always an aid to us on the philosophic path. The path towards knowledge, the path towards being able to shake off the shackles of the material world that bind us, that keep us down, and be able to rise in true and truer awareness. And from here, we are now moving on to the medieval period. The earlier art, the ancient art of India, was tender, beautiful. It was an art full of compassion. It was an art that was full of caring. It constantly showed us people who were caring for each other. It was an art of warmth and infinite love and caring. The purpose of the art was to melt our ego. For in the Indian philosophic path, our ego is the main obstacle that we have. It is our belief in ourselves, our desires for ourselves, our own material gains, which come in the way of our being able to see what is true and beautiful. Therefore, through this compassionate art, through this art of caring, through this art of warmth, we looked upon it, and through this art, we were able to rise to that grace which is within us. Now, by the late ancient period, the a change was beginning to come, because the Buddhist traditions had the Sangha, and the Sangha led to the congregation of so many intellectuals. So the path towards enlightenment, the meditation towards enlightenment, did not just remain a solitary act anymore. It also became an act of groups of people who got together. It led to the creation of universities where knowledge was sought. And it was an attempt to discover the steps on this path towards enlightenment, and to lay them out and to follow them through mandalas and so much more, through Tantra, so that a path could be formulated, a path which could be followed by all. And the art of this period begins to reflect this dynamism of the intellect, this search for the truth, which has now become an intellectual and logical activity, as well as an activity which is full of grace. So, this marvelous blend of grace and the intellectual quest for achieving this grace is beautifully encapsulated in the early medieval period. And it is the monastic institutions of Eastern India, Nalanda, Vikramshila, Udantapuri, and the sister institutions such as Paharpur in Bangladesh and more distant Indonesia, all of which reflect this dynamic intellect which is coming into play. And, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to now take you to the art of this marvelous period, this blend of both the compassion and the kindness and the softness and the gentleness and that exquisite naturalism of the ancient period, as well as the dynamic intellect of the search for the truth which has come into play. And I once again thank Sujata Chatterji, who makes it possible for me to do all that I do. And I request Sunil to please run the film. I will be very happy to answer your questions after the screening. Thank you very much.
In the 8th or 9th century BC, the Upanishads were composed in India. These were philosophic texts which contained earlier traditions of the land and were based upon centuries of speculative thought. All of existence was seen as one and a part of the same greater reality. The world of illusion, which we see around us through our veils of ignorance, was termed samsara. The purpose of philosophic thought was to break free from the spell of this unreality, the maya of the material world. The two best-known teachers of this time were Mahavira and Gautama Buddha, who were born in the middle of the 6th century BC. The Buddha gave a rational, philosophic message to his followers. He spoke of three noble truths: that there was pain in the world, that there was a reason for the pain, and that it could be removed by following the right path. Nirvana was the extinguishing of one's ego and self in the realization of one's true nature, which was of oneness with the universal spirit. The responsibility of salvation lay entirely upon the individual and his own efforts to discipline himself. Many found the path easier when they could pray to the Buddha and seek his benign help. In time, compassionate beings on their way to enlightenment, or bodhisattvas, were also conceived. They delayed their own salvation to help all sentient beings on the path. This new branch of Buddhism soon had many followers and began to call itself the Mahayana Order, or the Great Vehicle. Meanwhile, in the land of Magadha, in the eastern plains of India, where the Buddha had preached, great centers of Buddhist study came up. These had the bountiful support of Buddhist and Hindu kings of the region, and they developed into vast monastic universities. At these centers of learning, the message of the Buddha and his many qualities of wisdom and compassion was studied in great detail. These qualities of Buddhahood were personified in a pantheon of deities which was created. By meditating upon the personified qualities, a worshipper was to imbibe the virtues presented. Having attained those qualities, one became that deity. The best-known Buddhist universities, Nalanda, Vikramshila, and Odantapuri, were in eastern India, in the region of present-day Bihar. In fact, Bihar derives its name from the many viharas which flourished here. The greatest of these monastic centers was at Nalanda. It was a hub of learning where pilgrims and scholars came from all corners of Asia. Excavations at the Nalanda site have revealed numerous stupas, monasteries, hostels, staircases, meditation halls, and other structures. These speak of the splendor of the university, which was also famed for its 3 magnificent libraries. This was the thriving intellectual environment at Nalanda, which produced the most notable Buddhist thinkers. The 8th century saw the founding of the Pala Empire, which ruled over most of Bengal and Bihar till the 12th century. It was a period of flourishing trade and prosperity. The Palas were generous patrons of monasteries and art. Towards the end of the 8th century, Dharmapala founded a great university in present-day Bihar, the Vikramshila University, which was to rival the importance of Nalanda itself. By this time, Buddhism had entered its 3rd major phase, the Vajrayana school. It was this sophisticated philosophy which blossomed in the vibrant intellectual atmosphere of Vikramshila. In earlier Buddhist thought, liberation was possible only through many lifetimes of effort. The Vajrayana offered the possibility of nirvana within a single lifetime. At the heart of this system was the teacher-initiate relationship, where the seeker was guided by his teacher. Complex rituals, mantras or chants, and mudras or hand movements of Vajrayana Buddhism were codified in the form of tantras. Tantra literally means to carry on knowledge. The emphasis in this period was on the intellectual quest. This is constantly reflected in the art. Previous art had been more naturalistic. Its focus had been on a gentleness which moved us and dissolved our sense of the ego, which transported us through grace and ecstasy. The purpose of the art remained the same in this period. However, the dynamism of the intellect, which analyzes the mental processes of the realization of the truth, came to the fore. The many qualities of the Buddhahood within each of us and the steps on the path of enlightenment came to be studied and presented in detail. The qualities which move us towards the realization of the truth were presented in a manner which left no room for ambiguity or doubt. This was Vajrayana Buddhism, the vehicle of the Thunderbolt, whose logic was as clear and as striking as a clap of thunder. It was also as indestructible as a diamond. Such is the intellectual vigor which is presented in the art of the Pala period. The Indian philosophy of aesthetics holds that our response to beauty is a realization of the grace which underlies all of creation. A grace which is in all that there is around us. The perception of beauty, through the veils of our illusions, awakens us to a joyous awareness of the truth. In this period of intellectual vigor, the deities also represent complex paths of realization. One of the most remarkable qualities of the art and philosophy of this time is the great intellectual freedom which it represents. There appears to be no limit to the diversity in which the personal visualizations of the deities are presented. In the Magadha region stands the Mahabodhi temple, which commemorates the event of the enlightenment of the Buddha. Though greatly restored over the centuries, this 5th or 6th century temple is the oldest grand structure surviving in India. The architecture and sculptures would have inspired the Buddhist art of many Asian countries, from where pilgrims constantly came here. By the 5th century, the search for enlightenment had developed from a solitary personal exercise to an organized intellectual endeavor. Seals excavated at Nalanda show that the great monastic university here was patronized by the late Gupta kings. The earliest remains of monuments and sculptures found here date from the 6th and 7th centuries. Even in its damaged state, the main temple rises over 100 feet. Stucco figures of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas made here set the style which we see in numerous later stone and bronze images. They have sharper features than ever before and convey an impression of the dynamic intellect on which the focus has gone at this time. We see the carrying forward of the artistic traditions of the Sarnath Gupta and post-Gupta periods here. The torsos are smoothly delineated and the body is visible through the diaphanous garments. Half-closed eyes convey the serenity and peace of the earlier deities. Another temple at Nalanda has reliefs on the plinth. These are among the very few stone sculptures surviving in situ of the Pala period. Great stupas were also made further east, in present-day Tripura and Bangladesh. Terracotta plaques with reliefs adorn the plinths which remain of the once grand structures at Paharpur and Pilak. These reflect Vajrayana developments in Buddhism and are full of life and vitality. Freestanding images of bodhisattvas and buddhas made out of buff sandstone have been found of the late 8th century. By the 9th century, dark grey and black schist from further east becomes the principal medium. Crowned Buddhas, instead of the earlier bareheaded ascetic figures, begin to appear in Pala times. The crown here denotes the highest spiritual achievement. Wrathful bodhisattvas also begin to appear. These are to awaken the determination and ardent vigor with which the devotee must pursue the search for the truth. The fearlessness with which one must face the obstacles and confusions on this path. In many parts of India, the 8th and 9th centuries saw an increase in the number of bronze images. Metal images of the Pala period are among the finest which were produced. The areas where the largest numbers have been found are Nalanda and Kurkihar near Bodh Gaya. Some bronzes are simple compositions with expressions of infinite gentleness and compassion. They also have a lilting grace which reminds us that there is an end to the sorrow of the world. Later Pala sculpture is complex and presents the many traditional motifs of Indian art around the main central figure. The deities are increasingly formalized, and the iconographic concepts embodied in their various attributes have become more important. The number of bodhisattvas and buddhas, identifiable by their different attributes, have increased. As in the Hindu art of this period, female deities, who are the counterparts of the male ones, have become prolific. These were first seen in the caves of Western India in the 6th century. The path to salvation is now through intense meditation on the qualities of Buddhahood, depicted in deities and complex diagrams. Metal images were much easier to transport than large stone ones. It is these which travel to Nepal, Tibet, and further northwards, as well as to the countries of Southeast Asia. The sculptures transmitted the concepts and styles of Indic art far and wide in this period. The Sena dynasty came to power in the late 11th century and ruled till the first half of the 13th century. In the later Pala period and during Sena rule, Hindu icons were made in larger numbers. The centers of artistic production also shifted further east in Bihar and to Bengal. Hindu art is stylistically similar to the Buddhist art of this period and presents the same complexity of iconography.
In this gallery there are sculptures from Bihar and Bengal from about the 8th century up till the 12th century, and on one side of the room are Buddhist sculptures and the other are Hindu. And there's every reason to think that the same workshops and perhaps even the same artists were creating these sculptures either for Buddhist use or for Hindu use. And I also think it's perfectly possible that some of the patrons were commissioning Buddhist images for certain occasions and Hindu images for other occasions. Certainly historically there's absolutely no necessity that people of different religions can't live together as good neighbors and collaborators in their work as well.
The writings of the Tibetan historian Taranatha and considerable archaeological remains show that Orissa was another great center of Buddhism in Pala times. In the Asiya hill range are some of the most important Buddhist sites of the period. Excavations at Ratnagiri have found a large number of sculptures of the 8th to the 12th centuries. In the Buddha figure here and in other sculptures, we see a new feature. The carving is continued on a number of slabs of stone, which are pieced together to form the image. Stylistically, the figures have a massive appearance which reminds us of the Vakataka art of the preceding period in Western India. As in Bihar, the deities of Vajrayana Buddhism are depicted in large numbers. Here at Udaygiri, we see the benign Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara Khasarpani. He stands in a graceful and relaxed posture, which marks the Buddhist art of Orissa. Complex iconographic deities are also found, such as this Samvara from Ratnagiri. He holds many attributes in his numerous hands, which provide a detailed visual representation of philosophic concepts. Advanced forms of Tantric Buddhism were developed and traveled from here to the countries of Southeast Asia. Temple doorways continue the traditions established in the Gupta period and seen everywhere later. Such carvings are also seen in the Hindu temples of Bhubaneswar. The interconnectedness of all forms of life is eloquently expressed here. A sense of joy fills these depictions. The art of the Pala period reflects freedom of thought and dynamic philosophic developments. Despite the complex iconography which is now represented, the best work retains a sense of joy and grace which transport us. These exquisite sculptures take us far away from our material concerns to a realm of peace within us.
My grateful thanks again to India Habitat Center and to Sunil for another excellent screening. Ladies and gentlemen, it was here in Eastern India that the concept of the university was born. It is these great universities. In fact, it was a consortium of universities, Nalanda, Vikramshila, Udhanpuri, Paharpur, Indonesia, Takshila, Balkh, so many whose interaction, in fact, is seen in the movement of scholars from everywhere. Take an example. The great, well-known Buddhist teacher, Atisa, Dipankara Atisa. He studied at the Nalanda University, went to Indonesia thereafter for his further studies, and came back to become a very well-known teacher at the Vikramshila University. From the Vikramshila University, he was repeatedly invited to Tibet, where eventually he went, and he stayed for many years thereafter till he passed away, and it helped to lay the foundations for the Buddhism which survives in Tibet till today. These marvelous universities, in fact, portray an intellectual vigor, which is reflected in the art also. The sophistication of the art reflects the complex ways of thinking. And also, these universities had logical study. They had logical study, they had the study of epistemology, what is knowledge itself, and a great precision in the way that things were understood, broken down to understand them, formulated carefully, and examined. In fact, it is some of the traditions which were established here, which help us to trace the movement of the concept of the university from here all the way to Europe, where the first university opened many centuries later at Paris. Formalized concepts here, for instance, of the discursive argument, where when a thesis was presented, all the points in favor of the thesis were stated A, B, C, D, etc. And the points that were against the theses were equally carefully laid out A, B, C, D, etc. And thereafter, the A point of for the theses was taken, and there were points given for that A point and points given against that A point, so on and so forth. This was a very well formulated, very formalized, structured way of the discursive argument, which led to great care being taken to try to understand the truth as it is. It is not a whitewashing of the truth. It is not a way of trying to get one's theses across without paying enough attention to other possibilities, but in fact, a marvelous way of actually studying what is true. And it is when, for instance, places like the monastery at Balkh, which continued for a long time under the new religion which came there with the coming of Islam, the structures of the monastery at Balkh were in Afghanistan were maintained, and the manners of study, the manners of teaching, the manners of patronage were continued, even though the university was now under another faith. And from places like this in Central Asia, the European visitors who saw them took these concepts to Europe, and you're able to study the movement of the ideas very well because of formalized concepts like the discursive argument, which clearly show that movement so well. So, in fact, when we look at the beauty of this art, when we see the fact that this art, all of it, was meant to convey a movement towards a realization of what is true, you realize that the intellect, the heart, and the art were all very closely knit together, and such is the intellectual vigor, uh, such is the vigor of that time which is presented here. So in this medieval period, as I said before, it is both the grace, the gentleness, that inward look behind half-closed eyes of the earlier ancient period, as well as the dynamic intellect of the medieval period which has begun. And we see these beautifully reflected in Eastern India during this period. And at this point, I would be very happy to take any questions that you may have. You may please put them into the chat box from where Sujata will read them out to me. Thank you very much.
I'd like to take this opportunity to invite you all for our next screening, which is going to be on a Saturday, 15th March. And the film is The Roof of the World. It is about the early monasteries of the Trans-Himalayas. So do please mark it in your calendars. We'd love for all of you to be with us on 15th March, Saturday, same time, 6 p.m. There's a comment from Cheng Sochiat. So beautiful and so serene. Thank you so much for the screening.
Thank you very much for your comment. And indeed, it is such a pleasure to have a person as intellectually evolved and as gracious as you with us for our screenings. Thank you very much.
Pema, were there any Buddhist universities in South India at this time? Thank you for this illuminating presentation.
Uh, these are Mahaviharas, and they would have been viharas and Mahaviharas everywhere. So what we are talking about here is the largest of these Mahaviharas that records of which have survived. But it was a chain of education. It was a chain of the spread of knowledge, and it is it is the same influences which would have spread to all corners of the country. In fact, much of what is happening here also was originally formulated in Kashmir. For instance, the Yogacara school of Buddhism was in fact born in the valley of Kashmir, which developed later into the Vajrayana school. So the whole of the subcontinent and in fact the continent of Asia, because other places like Indonesia and all were fully a part of what was happening, uh, were interconnected, sharing knowledge with each other. And so, what we are seeing here, what we were talking about here, was the best known and the largest of the monastic institutions. Thank you, Pema.
Uday Bhanu Sen, wonderful presentation. Which is the university in Indonesia that was mentioned in the presentation?
Now, which exactly was this university is not, and its archaeological location has not been precisely located. In fact, I was invited to Indonesia to help in ascertaining whether it was at Muara Jambi in Sumatra that this was located. I had the good fortune to even meet the president of Indonesia when he was visiting the site of Muara Jambi. And we could not say, I was not able to study and say with conviction that indeed this was the site of the Buddhist university, though it could very well have been. But writings talk about it. Writings talk about Atisa also having visited there. And eventually, I hope one day we will know exactly where that university was. We do know that Chinese pilgrims coming often to Eastern India, Nalanda, etc., sometimes used to take a stopover at Indonesia. In fact, sometimes even learn their Sanskrit in Indonesia before they would come forward to Eastern India. Thank you very much.
Wonderful and awesome screening. Can you please elaborate the abstract concepts depicted in the sculptures?
These are the qualities which would lead us to enlightenment. The most essential qualities are compassion and wisdom. And then how the compassion is formed and how the wisdom is formed is broken down into so many different ways, so many different uh, building blocks towards it. As a matter of fact, you would notice that some of the deities appear to be wrathful because, in fact, our vigor, our wrath, you may call it, is part of the energy which is required to move towards enlightenment. Because the whole idea of leaving behind the knowledge of the world as we see it, and we have always seen it throughout our life, is something which is in many ways scary. And we have to pull up our socks, we have to awaken all the energy within us, awaken all the qualities that we have to face this ignorance and to combat this ignorance and to have the guts to be able to leave behind what we are familiar with. So there are so many different formulations. And in fact, as was mentioned in the film also, the intellectual freedom is so much that practically everybody has the freedom to create his own path, his own formulation towards this path. Thank you very much.
Rita Livel, I hope I've got the pronunciation right. If I haven't, apologies, please. This beautiful film was very wide ranging in its visuals. How long did it take you to make this film?
Thank you. Rita, yes, it should have taken a very long time. But each time I set out to uh, shoot my series of 26 films at a time, covering different periods of time, different schools of thought, and different parts, in fact, corners of the Indian subcontinent, I had very little time. So what we used to do is that we used to make a shooting schedule of about 240 days, about 8 months, and we used to travel. We used to often spend only one night in one place and wake up by 3, 4 o'clock every morning and be on the move to go on to the next place and shoot there with the early morning light and shoot at other places during the course of the day, and then move on to a pre-decided destination where we had also made our arrangements for overnight stay and stay the night there. So I'm afraid, though it should have taken many, many years to make all these films, but there was very little time. Doordarshan was very kind to patronize all this, but of course their budgets were extremely limited, and of course they had broadcast schedules to maintain. So all this was done in very little time with a very dedicated crew and a lot of travel and hard work. It was a great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Swami Prayoga, wonderful presentation, sir. Thank you so much for explaining the interlinks between Muara Jambi Temple in Indonesia and Nalanda Mahavihara in Bihar as centers of ancient Buddhist teaching in the region.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I think that's about it. And would you like to tell them that our films are recorded and put on YouTube?
Uh, you might like to see other films and talks on our YouTube channel after my own name, Benoy K Behl. And thank you very much for being with us. It was a great pleasure. Thank you.